I'm going to call our meeting to order, special called workshop on June 9th, 9 o'clock. The invocation will be led by Commissioner Rawls and the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Adams-Ack. Please stand if you're able to.
Heavenly and gracious Lord, we just thank you so much for this terrific day you've given us to be able to join together and work for the citizens of our community and their best interests. Lord, we just ask that you direct our deliberations and be with all the commissioners today as we take on this daunting task. Lord, we just ask that you bless everyone in our communities and keep all of our first responders safe, especially our soldiers that are overseas and their families. We ask that you keep everybody safe. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams-Ack and Commissioner Rawls. Oh, I'm going to go through that.
I'm going to say that's the one we don't want.
You don't want to start swapping phones.
It's a back page number.
I got a lot of feedback. Who's feeding back?
Mine, every time I turn on, it's doing that.
All right. Can we give Commissioner Rawls maybe a portable mic that might work?
What causes it?
I don't know. It was working fine yesterday. Okay.
There you go.
Your magnetic personality.
Yeah.
Well, Commissioner Rawls, you're going to be muted today. That's just the way
It's working now. Now it's working.
it's just
It's
the way
working.
it's going to be. So. There.
What causes that?
All right, good.
I'm going to walk around this.
No, we're not going to take
You ever seen Freddie
advantage of
Mercury in
the-
concert?
All right, public comment on agenda items. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we're going to go right into our workshop. And this is our budget for our constitutional officers. And we're glad to have our Sheriff, Gator Deloach, and Colonel Wells and Denise with us today from the Sheriff's Department. So thank you for being here. And Sheriff, we're going to just turn it over to you and let you make your presentation to us.
Okay, very well. Good morning. It's a pleasure to see everyone this morning. Before we begin, I just want to take a point of privilege, if I may, Mr. Chair, and personally thank the commission as a whole and at large. Even though some of you are newer, whenever I first took office and Joe assumed his position, we worked diligently to rebuild a relationship with the county and the commission as a whole. And from me to each of you, we are forever grateful for your willingness to work with us as we've moved forward and made some significant improvements at the Sheriff's Office and in the county to reduce crime. And we appreciate you for everything that you do and for your partnership with us.
Thank you.
So thank you. All right, moving right along, we will make this short and sweet. If at any point during the presentation anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me to stop and we can cover anything that you may have questions about.
I have a question. How do you spell your first name? That doesn't look like a G.
Where is it?
That ain't why he's called
right here.
Gator. That ain't why he's called Gator.
Yeah.
So I've been told I should have been a doctor because my handwriting's so bad, but that's a conversation for another day, I guess. So this first slide, what we're looking at here is essentially our 2022 budget request compared to 2021 appropriations. Pretty much self-explanatory. As you can see, there was a rather substantial carryover, and you may remember from some of the conversations that we had during the last budget cycle with some of our difficulty obtaining cars and other capital purchases, which led to a very large surplus in our budget that was subsequently rolled over to make us whole, inclusive of some CARES dollars that were also available, that the county was gracious enough to roll over. So as we move forward, the total appropriation for the sheriff's office last year was $24,473,073, of which $776,000 was CARES funding and contractual agreements, i.e. the school board youth resource contract and some grants, which led to a total carryover of $1,240,143, which was a net impact to the general fund of $22,466,410. This year, moving forward, you will see that there is an increase that we have requested, which we'll go over more in some subsequent slides to cover some of the detail. But it's essentially $1,569,672 for a total impact to the general fund of $23,844,182. So a net positive of $1,377,702. Now, that comes with a caveat because we are still unsure of what our carryover may look like. We have a number of cars that we've ordered to supplement our fleet to replace some of our aging vehicles that we talked about. We're having some difficulty obtaining them, so we don't know exactly when they will come in or if they will come in during this current fiscal year. That shortage is actually created by nothing of our own doing and can be simply attributed to COVID. We're waiting on some microchips for those vehicles that are produced in 3 plants in China, one of which was destroyed by a fire and the other 2 that were shut down almost completely because of COVID over the last year. So that carryover number may grow significantly. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like right now, and it could change significantly, certainly during hurricane season as well, as we all hope for the best but prepare for the worst moving forward. Does anyone have any questions about this slide before?
Sheriff, I do have a question. When you talk about not being able to buy the fixed assets that you need, cars, for example, but don't you have it in next year's budget that you need additional cars too? I mean, if we don't buy them this year and we just roll that money over, that doesn't really solve the problem, right?
Yeah, we're not asking for any more next year for any vehicles.
So let's just say, for example, that 15 cars can't show up this year. We're not asking for an additional 15 cars next year. We can just carry that money
Correct.
over and buy the 15 cars.
Yes.
But that's already included in the 1.377.
That is included.
Wait a second.
Well, no, that's in this current fiscal year.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That money's already been spent.
All right, okay.
It's already encumbered, but we
It's
can't,
encumbered, but we
we
have-
can't be certain that we'll take delivery before the fiscal year closes
Gotcha.
out. So there may be a necessity to roll those funds over.
But if you roll them over, you already spent the money.
Yes,
So it's, okay.
yeah.
All right, Commissioner Abzak?
There
you have a-
very well may be, there likely will be, minus any hurricanes or minus any catastrophic inmate medical, there'll be additional unencumbered carryover.
You can
just
bring
don't
that
know.
microphone down to
Hey,
you.
grab.
So, as Denise, the sheriff, and I worked through this, is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
So, we could have a very large carryover or very modest. It could be very large because none of these vehicles showed up, but even if they do, we still expect a modest carryover absent a catastrophic hurricane or catastrophic medical, which then could reduce your impact to the general fund next year. So, like the sheriff said, we're requesting to operate with $940,711 more dollars than we did last year. The general fund is just impacted so heavily because CARES is missing. Because CARES money is missing.
Here's money.
CARES money was used to make us whole last
As
year.
you
That was
recall,
non-recurrent.
we used carryover money from the previous year's budget and CARES money to make the budget whole, which if I remember correctly, actually resulted in a net zero impact, and did not account for any additional dollars allocated to the sheriff's office from ad valorem taxes, if that makes sense.
So we do think that some carryover will reduce that impact, which is standing at 1.377. There likely will be, minus any of that catastrophe, we can reduce that with any unencumbered carryover. If we hold the way we are now, we're predicted to have some.
All right, let me clarify that. Sheriff, you just said that there was no impact to the general fund last year based on COVID finances?
Well, if there was any, it was modest would probably be an understatement, because with the carryover money and the CARES dollars that we were allocated from the county, that's what actually allowed us to make our budget whole.
If I remember correctly, you were about $1 million, you were requesting about $1 million more. We didn't have it to give you. Then the CARES money came in. You got $900,000+ of that, and that y'all said, okay, we're good with this
I think
right
it was
now.
774, Denise?
I believe so.
774, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. But you, but that also put you in a position where you were not making any strides towards any other replacement of any capital expenditures, correct?
That's correct.
When was the last time you guys had any money for capital expenditures?
Traditionally, in the history of the sheriff's office, for as long as I could remember, we have not budgeted for capital expenditures, vehicle replacements.
How do you do that?
Things of that nature. We're just as fiscally conservative as we possibly can be, and rub pennies together to make nickels to purchase vehicles.
How do you make tires and replacement parts for vehicles that you need, or uniforms, or?
Well, we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation.
Like you recall, and we talked about, we were able to accomplish significant capital improvement last year via the carryover, and that was to get our fleet where it needs to be, so there won't be any fleet requests this year. Got an update this morning that they are moving through the production line. It's just unknown if they're going to get hung up with the microchip, so we remain hopeful they'll show up and we won't have to worry about
I
it.
saw a news article that said that apparently the microchips are starting to come in, and the problem now is going to be transportation
Right.
and backlogs of everybody else.
That was my understanding too, is they are beginning to trickle in. We just can't be certain that
crank
it
the
was
engine
going to
now.
be, yeah.
We participated in a conference call with actually Ford Motor Company in Detroit, and they are putting a priority on first responder vehicles when those microchips get here. So we remain hopeful.
All right, Mr. Turner, you have a question?
We can talk about this now, or we can talk about it later, whichever, after your presentation, but what about the capital expenditures that were made in this year's budget that aren't necessarily recurring, and so shouldn't that capital expenditures that were made, such as for radios and things like that, shouldn't they offset some of the increase in like insurances and things like that, because those capital expenditures aren't recurring? And so we realized they were in there, and we realized that you needed some of them last year, and so we knew about that. But the capital part of the thing shouldn't be folded over every year unless you need additional capital. You need to use that for additional capital expenditures, and then then it could be rolled over. But for like the radio deal, we've spent money on radio, y'all spent money on radios this year and last, and so, but now we're trying to fund the communication switch over in a different category, not within your budget. We're with the St. Johns County deal that you fortunately came up with, and I think that's still in the works, that we can join with them somehow, and instead of it costing $8 million, it's going to cost maybe 3 or 4 or whatever. I think the judge is still out on that, or the jury's still out on that. But some of the capital expenses that were made in that last year that perhaps aren't reoccurring, we need to try to identify what those are if they're not needed in the next year for the same things, such as vehicles.
Sure.
Like we've given you vehicle money for the last 3 years. The first year we weren't able to use it all, or y'all weren't able to use it all, and so it rolled over, and it rolled over last year and rolled over again, but we're getting close to getting your fleet replaced. At some point, that shouldn't just continually roll over, because we don't buy new vehicles every year, and so somewhere in there, we need to figure out the capital expenditures that were used, and if you need them again, if moving forward, if not, then they should offset some of the expenses and become reoccurring if we're gonna use it as reoccurring every year. Does that make sense to you at all?
Absolutely, and I think that you make a very valid point there, Commissioner Turner. But we've also got to remain cognizant that with first responder vehicles and the way that they're operated and the conditions that they're operated in, they have to be replaced on a periodic basis. We've just now gotten our fleet at a point to where we feel like it's somewhat stable, but there is a necessity for some vehicle purchases. The general philosophy and best accepted practice is that you should be replacing about 25% of your fleet a year, so that you're replacing those vehicles about every 4 years or so.
How many vehicles do y'all have now? Do you have that number?
Ooh,
Don't you have a couple of hundred?
200.
Consider boats and stuff, yeah. When you consider the specialty vehicles, it gets there, but it's about 106 patrol cars?
Exclusive of, you know, our.
Talking about
boats,
everything, vehicles and everything, you have about 200, don't you?
Roughly 200.
And you got 300 employees, roughly?
Well, there's 200 and roughly 260 full-time employees, and then with our part-time employees and volunteers that we depend on, that we still incur some cost, of course. We're at about 308 total employees and volunteers.
Okay, I think that's all I have at this time, Mr.
Sheriff.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Sheriff, along those lines about cars, you're just talking about 25% of your patrol cars. Some of your other cars, I don't know how you drive them, but say, for example, lieutenant or whatever, probably his car doesn't need to replace every 4 years. I mean, I wouldn't think that they're
Well,
putting the wear and tear that.
I would respectfully disagree with that assertion, because our lieutenants are actually out on the
Well,
road.
I'm just picking a
Sure.
rank.
We are detectives, we can generally stretch to 5
You know,
and a
we
half,
can
6.
stretch those maybe 5 or 6 years for detectives' vehicles, because they're not operated all the time under the same conditions. Although detectives are expected to answer calls for service if they're in close proximity and back up some of our deputies. So, you know, they're still beating down those dirt roads.
Sure.
But maybe not with the frequency that some of the green and white patrol cars that you see are.
All right, Mr. Turner, you had a question?
I'm not sure of the answer to this, so I'm really not trying to get a gotcha moment on you guys today. I'm really not. So, when you took over several years ago, and I understand there's been tremendous strides made for better representation in law enforcement and all that, but back then, you had so many vehicles per deputy at that time, and I don't think it was one-on-one when you took over,
It
was
was.
it?
Yes, it was.
It was one-on-one then, okay, so basically, as we've gone through the years, have you increased the amount of deputies on the road in the last 4 years? So basically, we have the same amount of deputies on
We
the
have the
road we
same
had
amount
4
of
years
deputies,
ago?
and actually, well, you'll see, and we're gonna talk about some of that moving forward. But in this request this year is actually a request to add 6 additional law enforcement positions. And we'll talk about some of that later in the presentation, because what we found, and I don't want to get too far ahead of where we are, although crime is down, our call volume is continuing to increase exponentially. And it's primarily, you know, quality of life issues, noise complaints, and things like that that don't necessarily have any impact on our crime, but they're important to our constituents and the residents that we serve. So we are seeing a significant increase in call volume, although crime is down.
So it's taking a step backwards to what our previous conversation was. You feel at this time that all the capital expenditures that were used for whatever reasons in the last 2 years that have folded forward into additional capital expenditures for the following year, that those are still gonna be necessary at the same level as last year?
No, sir, I don't.
I wouldn't say that they'll be necessary at the same level, no, I don't think so.
I just, if Sheriff, if I may, just to add, I mean, this is not reflective of capital. There's no pre-planned car purchases for the coming year. The increase in this budget is heavily reflective in personnel services. So we're.
I understand,
yeah.
Colonel, but I know that, and I'm not trying to interrupt, please excuse me for that, but the last couple of years, we have had capital purchases that went forward. It was cars, and it was when we, and I'm not saying that they're not absolutely necessary, because it's gonna save us money in the future by buying radios and things that we need, that, and the new radios, I understand y'all are purchasing, you're purchasing, that will also work on the new system. I think that's
Yes.
very thrifty and good idea, because at some point, we're gonna be able to switch over, so I get all that, but at some point, we should have enough of them to get through where we're at the present time, and those are capital expenditures, you know, any time equipment or any of that. So I understand that you got to continue buying vests, you got to continue buying those other capital expenditures. They don't go away. They roll over every year from now on. But I guess I'm trying to identify what portion, if any, of those capital expenditures that have been made need to be treated as reoccurring capital expenditures, because you got to buy a certain amount of vests every year. Nothing you can do about it. So you may call that a capital expenditure, but it's a recurring capital expenditure that's gonna happen time after time after time. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do, is identify the differences between recurring expenses, capital expenditures, and recurring capital expenditures.
Sure.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions?
Last year, you guys replaced an AC unit on your building. What are you looking like going forward? Are we going to be discussing the building maintenance later, or?
Yeah, that's actually, that's something that's incorporated into the presentation as well, that
Okay.
we'll cover shortly.
I'll wait till we get that.
All right.
Okay.
Go
Anyone
ahead.
have any more questions about this slide? Okay, as we look at this next slide, this is a historical view of our budget from 2016 to 17, which was a budget that I inherited from Sheriff Hardy and Rick Ryan's administration. And this is just kind of a historical overview. But the $18,567,490 was actually the budget that we inherited. As you'll see, the 2021-2022 proposed budget is $23,844,122. That is a net increase of $5,262,632. And I wanted to bring this, to put this slide in here just to highlight the funds that we have returned to the county. In some of our discussions that we've had individually and collectively as a group, there was, I believe, a reoccurring thought that, our budget had increased in excess of $5 million. And while it has, I think that it's necessary for us to just to highlight the amount that the sheriff's office has actually returned to the county, and that you've been gracious enough to roll over, which actually totals $3,403,173. So the actual net increase or additional burden that it has placed on ad valorem taxes comes out to about $1,873,459. So that from 2016 to 2022 reflects about a total of a 10% increase to the general fund, or an impact of about 1.6% annually, taking into account the amount that we have been able to roll over from subsequent years, if that makes sense.
I actually got 8%, and you divide that by 5 years, so yeah, it's Way below the CPI.
Math errors will be my fault. I generated the
You rounded
the
up.
slides,
No,
so,
it's-
okay. I'll take the credit for the math errors.
Does anyone have any questions about this slide or?
I don't have a question, I just, because I guess this is my first budget and this will help for all the rest of them. How does the rollover work? Can someone just,
Well, I can answer that, but Julianne.
Julianne, could you
we do
answer that?
budget. We do budget a certain amount of money for the constitutionals to return to us. And then, so we do budget that, and Julianne.
Let me make this easy. He's from New York. It's a kickback.
It's not a kickback. It's money that they thought they were gonna spend or didn't or couldn't, or whatever the case may be. Julianne?
So basically, unused dollar, I just want to make sure I understand. Unused dollars that at the end of the fiscal year weren't used has to come back to the county, but then do we put that back to the sheriff's office or the constitutional?
We don't have to, but we have in the last 3 years. Any
Okay.
money that's been returned for as far as the sheriff's office, we've put back into their budget.
So this
because-
3.4 million, basically you returned us, we went back to you.
Yes, that's correct. And before you, if you don't mind, Julianne, before you make any comments, I'll just add a little commentary to that. Prior to 2017, there was always some carryover money that was budgeted into the county's general budget, a return of, I think it was $150,000 from the sheriff's office to the county that was then carried forward to balance the general budget in the subsequent fiscal year. We all collectively agreed that that was probably a terrible accounting practice and agreed to kind of get away from that. And over the past, the commission has been gracious enough to work with us because of our fiscal responsibility and the ability to return some of this money, which was then rolled back into our budget in subsequent years. And that's where you see that $3,403,173.
So does that make, so let's say it's just the budget was $1 million and the return was 100,000 from this year. Does that make the actual end year budget for the sheriff's office $900,000?
Revised, but
Revised, right,
when
the-
he's
the
talking
actual.
about the appropriation, it does not include that rollover. So the
Okay.
beginning year appropriation would not include that. When we balance the budget, it's not going to include that.
Right.
But during the fiscal year, when we revise the budget, of course, his appropriation goes up.
But then when we give that 100,000 back, it makes this year's budget look a little bit, that $100,000 higher.
Yes.
When it actually happens. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I just want to make sure I got that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, please.
if I'm remembering right, back before you were the sheriff, Gator, there was also a deal with the previous sheriff that he would try to return a certain amount to go towards the payment on the jail, and of course, that subsequently went away, because again, that's just bad budgeting, to give you money to give us back at the end of the year in order to pay a payment that we know's coming. That's a shell game.
Sure.
So that all went away too, and I don't even know if it wasn't before you were even here, I'm not sure, but somewhere that went away. So on top of what you were just discussing, there was also that deal that has since gone in arrears also, that was basically a shell game at that time. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Yeah,
To coin a
that was-
phrase that you use on a regular basis is basically taking money out of one pocket and putting it into the other.
That's right.
Well, the reason, I kind of led the charge on that, because again, Commissioner Turner was right. We were charging the Sheriff Hardy for the payment of the jail. And really, it was a Better Place plan money that should have been, it was about $500,000. So it was kind of ludicrous for us to charge him and him give us that money back. So I've led the charge to move that money over to Better Place, because it is a county facility. At the end of the day, it's for the benefit of the county, and it is owned by the county, so.
Well, it definitely didn't make sense.
Right.
For us to give the sheriff's department additional funds in promise that they were gonna give us funds back at the end of the year
I
to
know.
help us pay a payment on our building. That just didn't make walking around sense.
You
I
should have
know
been here the-
somewhere in the past that deal was made, and it was, at the time, they thought it was a good deal, but it just didn't make sense if you think about it.
Sure.
You should have been here the day the keys got dropped for the jail on the table. So that was a good day.
That's what I'm. That's what.
That wasn't a fun, that wasn't a fun. Happened right there at that.
Yeah, let's not go there.
And if I could,
I
just
probably
for-
would have handled that a little different, but let's not go there.
If I could, just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, I
It
just
was
want
not
to point
you.
out that was under a previous administration,
said
and that
that.
that was not me.
That was not you, sir. No,
I'll have
sir.
to say, just for full disclosure, I actually told them to do that. I did. I said, if it gets to that point, they're not gonna fund it, just walk in and give them the keys back to their building.
Well, that wasn't we were funding it. It just wasn't,
Right.
well, never mind. Go ahead, sir.
Shouldn't be a burden.
Does anyone have any additional questions on this slide before we move forward in the presentation?
It sounds like we're asking them 3 slides ahead of your presentation.
That's all right. That's all right. So one of the biggest problems that we're facing is still with employee retention. And what I'm proposing as a solution that is incorporated into this budget request is a 5% cost of living increase for sworn members and communications officers, and 3% for non-sworn members. But it's worth noting that these recommended cost of living adjustments do not apply to any member above the rank of sergeant. So any of our higher ranking, we'll say better compensated employees are not eligible for this raise. And the unfortunate reality is that's still not going to get us where we need to be competitive with some of the surrounding agencies that we still, unfortunately, despite all of our efforts, hemorrhage deputies to some of our surrounding counties. So in the last 3 years, we've actually had 24 deputy sheriffs and communications operators that were lost to other agencies. And some of the, the interesting thing that we found was that it's strictly a money issue for them. These deputies were happy, productive employees. We couldn't identify any issues with morale, and it was strictly a means for them to make a better wage for them to be able to support their families. These 24 deputy sheriffs and communications operators represents 76 years of combined experience leaving for other counties and agencies to work for. It also represents an estimated cost of $724,000 to train and equip these new members. That's an initial investment that we make with a new deputy sheriff we'll use, for example, of somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. That whenever they depart and go somewhere else, that's an investment that we've made that we can never recoup. So that the net effect of that is that it lowers the desirable experience that we have for critical positions, those in investigations and those that have more complex and technical skills that are involved. And as a result of that, all of our shifts and our criminal investigative units are short-staffed due to the vacancies. We have a number of vacancies right now in our Criminal Investigations Bureau. We are actually technically full on paper in patrol. However, that comes with a caveat because a significant portion of those vacancies that were filled are actually new trainees, and it takes us about 16 weeks to fully train a deputy sheriff before they can be turned loose and operate independent of a field training officer. So deputies are making somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 per year more in surrounding counties. And that's, I know that we can't overcome that all at once, but we've got to continue to, even if we can't close that gap, to at least try and maintain it to the best of our ability, because as salaries increase in those surrounding counties, if we don't subsequently increase ours, then that gap widens even more, and the potential exists for us to lose even more of our highly qualified and skilled deputies. And I think that it's worth mentioning And certainly, this is not a dig at our, at our emergency service personnel, our EMTs and paramedics. But it's worth noting that in Putnam County, the starting salary for a deputy sheriff is just north of $35,000. A paramedic here in Putnam County makes $41,692, or 18.5% more. And I realize that this is not something that any of you here are to be held accountable for, but it's an issue that needs to be brought to your attention, that we have to work to close that gap. And just as a comparison, the basic training for a paramedic is approximately 1,200 hours and approximately 1,470 hours to become a deputy sheriff. This recommended raise will move the starting salary for a deputy sheriff to $36,950. So it doesn't completely close the gap, but it gets us closer to where we need to be. And I think that it's worth mentioning. We work in very close cooperation with our rescue and emergency services personnel. But the fact of the matter is, if there is some type of an active scene, firefighters and emergency service personnel cannot approach that scene until law enforcement actually arrives and deems it safe. So there is a life safety issue here that we're dealing with as well. And I realize that it doesn't get us near where we need to be, but it certainly closes that gap, although not nearly as significantly as I would like.
Sheriff, Mr. Adamsack has a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Is there a potential to have some sort of bonus structure, like sign-on bonus, that doesn't activate till the third or fourth or fifth year? Because the number 76 by 24, I mean, those guys are your youngest guys. They're 3 years. They're coming in and then they're leaving. I mean, if you do the numbers, that's your 24 guys that had 76 years. They've only been here 3 years, 3.2 years or something. So what they're doing is they're getting the training and they're leaving. So is there a way to incentivize it? Because there's no loss in incentive if you said at year 5, we'll give you $10,000. If they leave at year 3, that money just never happens. But it may get them to carry over those 2 years and help balance out some of that $724,000 to train. I mean, that's how the Navy and other organizations do it. I mean, they sucker us into re-enlisting.
Sheriff can go to, we do have a step pay plan that increases their salary every third year.
Yeah, I'm not looking at step pay. I'm talking about a straight up the day you hire them. You say, hey, if you're here year 5, it's $8,000 or something. It's going to be a bonus. And that way, that maybe at that year 3.2 years when they're going, wow, St. John's, they're going, oh, well, wait, if I wait, it's $5,000 over these last 2 years that I'll get in a one-time payment. That might be the down payment to my house, or it might be part of my kids' college savings, or I may be able to bounce that into my retirement. Just kind of like an incentive type thing. It's just something to consider, and it's.
I do like the idea. I think that it may be viewed as disingenuous by some of our employees, because the rationale that they would use was because they typically leave between about 18 and 24 months, Colonel?
Right about 2 years. Yeah.
18 to 24 months, so right about that 2-year mark. And I think, at least me playing through that in my mind, the logic that they would use is, why would I stay 4 years to get a $8,000 or $10,000 bonus when I can go work in St. Johns County and make $8,000 a year more and double that bonus in just a 2-year period? But I like the idea. I think it's sound in theory. Plus, I overheard Denise just a second ago. She brings up a very valid point. Whenever they go to one of the larger agencies that unfortunately has the ability to pay more than we do, that results in a substantial net increase to their retirement that they're building over their tenure and their career.
The way I look at it is, even if you only incentivize 2 people to do it out of the 8 or 10 that leave a year, that's saving you around $200-some thousand in training expenses. So that $10,000 I think would be well spent, because you're not re-spending that. So even if it only works on 5% of the people, it still is something to consider.
Sure.
You know, I think the step pay plan has benefited us, so it's a modest increase every third year that they're guaranteed as long as the budget allows, and that's reflected in part of this increase is to continue that. And then we have an incentive for them that they can reach at 5 years. Now that requires a little bit of some community service and some extra training requirement. That's called their master status, where they can do that. We've looked at those several year after retention, or like you say, the retention bonuses. The initial issue that I personally had with them and speaking with some of the deputies is, well, what about all of us that have already been here? So then do you make everybody at the agency whole, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that way? Or otherwise you could have a 5-year guy, if you gave let's say a $5,000 incentive to a 5-year guy, he's probably now making more than a sergeant. So you have to make everybody whole somehow or another there.
I'm a person that doesn't believe in that, but
Okay.
I think you're trying to solve a problem for the community and for your agency, and the other employees really just need to be cognizant of that, in my opinion.
I understand that.
And I understand the heartache,
Yeah.
but I mean, you're trying to solve it. You got to put. If I was in your shoes, I would position it as this is a net benefit for all of us, because you're not going to have 18 newbies coming back in this year again. So your level of effort in your job is going to be lessened, and there's other ways to go about it, I guess is what I'm saying. We have to solve the problem, or you do in this case, but and that's just an idea. Whether you use it or not is up
It
to you.
is certainly worth some
Okay, Commissioner
exploration.
Rawls has a question real quick.
So, we've had this conversation before about housing incentives. Getting people to tie to the community is important. You know, if they come to work here and they live outside the community, and you see the sheriff's deputy's cars parked out there in East Palacian, up on the north end, that's frustrating. And we have money in our SHIP program. If we could set our LHAP up to give grants to critically needed, if we identified critical needs in the community, we can not shift the money, but push the money in that direction, and not just sheriff's deputies, but nurses and paramedics, and you know, all the folks that we're missing. The selective re-enlistment bonus that Commissioner Adamczak was talking about is very effective. And in 1988, when I got out of the Navy, I was offered a $25,000 SRB to stay in. The military has career groups, and they look at critically needed. When you're in career group A or B, you're less than 100% manned. They're going to start throwing money in that direction, because it does take a lot of time to train somebody. When I got out of the Navy, I was a deck edge operator on an aircraft carrier. There's only 4 of us in our entire ship, and not many of them Navy-wide. So it's cheaper to offer me an incentive to keep me around than it is to let me leave and bring somebody else in and have to retrain them. Same thing that you guys are dealing with. You know, I think when we discussed it last time, Colonel, was like $26,000 or $28,000 when you have to when you have a new recruit that comes in and has to go right alongside somebody for their first 6 months or whatever with a field training officer. That's costing real cash, because you're doubling up.
Right.
2 people in one car, and then the uniforms and the car and all that garbage. So there's Commissioner Adamczak's right. We've got to suck it up and start spending the money, because we're already spending the money, and it just seems ridiculous that we're having this conversation, because we're spending the money, but we're watching it fly out of the county literally, instead of spending the money and leaving it here, and then having the numbers change on this screen. So your average seat time is going up, not staying flat, not going down.
You're actually saving money for the other counties, because we generally
Right.
hire directly out of the academy. They take our trained deputies, they
Right.
cut that training by 2/3 because they don't need the full training, and so they're saving money on us.
And I think that we rank somewhere close to the very bottom as far as the poorest counties in Florida. It just,
Colonel Wells is actually right. So what happens, just like he alluded to a few minutes ago, is when a deputy that we train and we invest that time and expense in, they go to another agency and they go into an abbreviated field training program, whereas ours is 16 weeks long, because we're hiring directly out of the academy generally. You know, they can cut that time in easily in half, or maybe even by 75%, because they're so well trained when they leave us.
They learn their SOPs.
It's merely changing agency names and getting familiarized with some of the more subtle nuances of their policies and standard operating procedures.
Especially when you move from accredited agency to accredited agency, our policies are going to even mirror. And since
But
we're
I think the
accredited,
answer is having a strategic plan that includes retention. You know, I harp a lot about small business in Putnam County. There's no support for small business retention in Putnam County. You know, who does somebody go to local here, short of the Small Business Development Center that's really located at the University of Florida for small business retention? But it costs us every time a small business shuts down too. We need the jobs. We need people to move here, earn their money, and spend their money here. That's the cyclical pattern that we need to get into instead of what we're in now, which is come get a job, get trained. Archer Western's hiring. You can run a front-end loader. We'll pay you $22 an hour to come run a heavy piece of equipment. You know, we can't compete with that as a county. You can't compete with it as a sheriff's department. But I think we're going to have to figure out how to make that investment and start taking a look at it over a strategic period of time, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, getting something started that your employees can look forward to. That's going to increase morale. That's going to give people hope for the future.
that glare.
But you know, we're not going to fix it in one budget cycle, obviously, but we got to start putting something aside for it. And I still think if you set aside $2,000 a year and said every 5 years, what is your milestone? Is it 5 years that you give recognition for? Is it 5 years, 10 years? How do you do that?
So for recognition or for?
Recognition and service.
Guys, we
So-
really got to move. We got 12 minutes before our next one, and I've got 3 speakers on the line here.
Okay, we
So
better,
can we,
yeah.
Mr. Rawls, are you okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Pickett?
Yeah, Gator, the 36,950, that would be a base starting salary, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Are all your employees, are sheriff's deputies, officers, they're on high-risk retirement, is that correct?
Yes, they are.
What does that look like with the retirement and everything on there? I know you've got a number. I don't put y'all on the spot, and if you don't, but I figured y'all have it figured. I
Denise,
glanced at them last night.
I'll pass that burden along to Denise and put her on the spot. She can probably give you a more accurate representation of what that looks like.
She's doing a little bit of figuring. If we can just move on and we'll
Yeah.
get you that answer. If
You're
you don't mind.
at
if we-
38% just with your.
Well, it's on page
unemployed.
21 of our thing here, so we can look at what the total retirement is and all that.
28% of just payroll for high risk.
Okay. Mr. Turner, you had a comment?
I guess that was my question. A lot of that is the retirement and everything.
is.
It's just a tremendous burden. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I mean, it's a tremendous burden to carry.
Just the retirement on that is $9,034 a deputy, and then, of course, the liability insurance on all of them and all the other that comes with it.
Right, so in Denise's point, if you're going for 8,000, you know, to another county, throw that retirement on there, that is an incentive to move. Yeah,
Right.
I agree.
which is unfortunate.
Mr. Turner?
Yes, you know, we need to keep in mind here that we've been working on this for 3 years now. The deputy, and I'm not saying it's enough yet, but the deputies have got a 17% increase 3 years ago. They got an increase 2 years ago and an increase this year to some degree. And so I know we still have a discrepancy, and I know it's still an issue, but the county, unfortunately, just doesn't have the funds to get us to where we all wish we could, that we paid $1,000 a year more than St. John's, but we can't get there. So we're having to work on it, and we have been working on it, to your credit. We have been working on this for several years.
And to the commission's credit as well, you know, each of you individually and collectively, and those that served prior to you, you know, made this a priority, and we understand that we have to work within our means. But at some point, we've just got to take a hard look introspectively inside and decide whether we're going to make this a priority and get these paid where they need to be, where they're at least comparable with what a paramedic here is making, and not even necessarily compare ourselves to other counties, but compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges, so to
Yeah,
speak.
I realize there's gonna have to be some serious decisions made. There's gonna have to be decisions made on, I mean, before this meeting started today, we were 14.5 million in the red from current requests, and I'm not saying which one should be prioritized or not, but we're already in the red further than we could ever expend money towards, so.
Well, I agree, and I'll just dovetail off of that comment. At some point, it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that public safety is a priority for a number of different reasons. By my estimation, one of the number one metrics that people look at whenever they look at relocating to a county is the crime rate. We have made some great inroads at driving that down significantly. And I don't think that there is a single commissioner that sits on this board that has any desire to look at a county of 72 to 75,000 residents and say that public safety doesn't matter.
I think you're preaching at the choir, Gator, with
Sure.
that. I mean, I get it. But I guess my point to this whole part of this conversation is that it isn't like we haven't been trying hard as we can the last 3 years, but you can only go so far, as you move in that direction.
Sure,
So-
and we're cognizant of
and
that. That's why we've been
do we-
willing to work with the
and do
commission
we
over the
make-
last 4.5 years.
Do we make the decision to try and come up with the money to fund it all? Do we say, okay, if you wanted your additional deputies that you're trying to add this year, or you wanted salary raises, which one would you take? I mean, I don't know. There's just a lot of options here that we haven't discussed yet, so, and all of that kind of needs to be part of this conversation on, it's not a matter of, this is what I want. I mean, it's never been like that, even though we've gone out of our way to get you the funding you've asked for every year, even though it hasn't always been exactly conventional, we've made it happen every year so far. So, part of this conversation needs to be, this year, I think, is how can we get there? How can we get there and get you what you need, but get there, in a way, you don't have to convince me you don't need it. You don't have to make that part of your presentation. I know you feel like you do, but with this commissioner, you don't. I realize that you need it. And we can't fund as much as you need, not want, but need, no matter what we do. So I'm hoping that we can find some way to get it included to where we fund your needs somehow or another, like we have the last few
Sure.
years. I just don't know how it's gonna be. We don't even have revenue projections yet.
Sure.
We don't know how much we're even getting.
Certainly, and if I could just segue off of that for just a moment. You're exactly right. The commission has been gracious enough to work with us over the past, working within the constraints of our budget, and we're certainly grateful for that.
Sheriff, how many more slides do you have to go?
There are 3 more slides.
Can we kind of move really quickly on that?
Certainly.
Thank you. Okay.
But that's one of the things.
So
Mr.
just
Rawls, we're going to move pretty quick on the
very
next
briefly, I won't,
I just go make one statement if I can.
Okay,
And so
one question real quick.
this is just in a nutshell for this commissioner, and you'll know where I'm going. If we don't start right now, taking a look at the future and starting to fund for it, this conversation will be worse next year. It's worse this year than the year before, and it's going to continue that way, especially in light of what's happening right now with our economy. If anybody ever had a hope of buying a house in St. Johns County that was making $45,000 or $50,000 a year with dual income, by the way, they can forget that hope. We've got to start
we
doing
have got to
something
move
to
on.
make ourselves affordable here. And
But
make
I was gonna wait till the end, what I'm gonna say it now as well, so.
So I just, I think we as a commission need to start looking at ways to fund this, to correct the problem, close and we haven't even discussed the $15 an hour minimum wage and what that's going to do to everybody. So we've got to start having this conversation, and it needs to be strategically.
Every year.
We do. We've got to move on. Commissioner Adams,
Yeah, I personally think the prior slide, I don't think you asked for enough personally. So, I mean, you're not meeting the need. You may as well do nothing with what you did compared to where you're at, because you're not going to accomplish anything as far as retaining people with that. I want you to retain people. So I'm telling you, I don't think it's enough. And we need as a commission, in my opinion, to get you everything you need to retain a greater percentage of your people. Now, would I like you to tell us kind of what percentage you hope for out of this? That'd be great. We could do that offline. But I really don't think it's enough to meet the objective of retaining people.
So you're saying we need to grow government and raise taxes to fund them?
I'm saying that people that are public servants out there, basically serving and protecting, need to be compensated more properly than what we are currently. Yes.
Okay, but I do want to point out, the sheriff has discretion, we give him money. They can develop their own plan of what they need to do to retain their employees, they always have. They don't come back to us and ask us for positions, they don't come back, they get a lump sum of money, and they are responsible for their budget. So Sheriff, continue on real quick, please.
So in the interest of time, I'll just gloss over this next slide and leave it to each of you to read. The purpose of the slide is to demonstrate some of the more innovative things that we've introduced in the last 4.5 years to help with some of our retention woes. And these are all initiatives with little or no impact to the budget that we have creatively introduced to be able to help us retain some of our members. No need for me to read over all this. It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll certainly leave each of you with a copy of this PowerPoint presentation that you can go back and reference, but
Thank you.
in the interest of time, we'll just forego this slide if that's all right, unless you have any questions about it.
Go ahead.
So this goes back to something that we alluded to, our a problem with response times, lack of traffic enforcement, and increasing call volume. It goes without saying, and I'm certain that each of you are aware and perhaps hypercognizant of the number of traffic fatalities that we have had this year, and that number has been increasing exponentially. Criminal events have decreased by more than 43% in the last 4 years. And our preliminary numbers that we can project from indicate that we are anticipating about another 9.5% to 10% reduction for 2020 compared to 2019. It takes us some time. Doesn't take us that much time to compile the data, but it takes FDLE some time to go through and scrub that data for the previous year before it's released. But we anticipate almost a 10% reduction from 19 to 20. Traffic crashes and quality of life service are drastically increasing. Currently, there's only 9 patrol zones in our county that covers 827 square miles. Each zone has 1 deputy sheriff, resulting in a much larger area, a much larger average coverage area. So PCSO's average response time to a priority 1 call, which would be some type of a disturbance in progress or an aggravated battery or a robbery or something along those lines, is 12 minutes, which is about 40% higher than 2 years ago. So when a priority 1 call holds due to no available deputies, the average hold time is 6 minutes, which would in effect increase those response times for a priority 1 call to about 18 minutes. That's unacceptable in my opinion, but we can only do so much with the resources that we have. Many of the lower priority calls have a response time in excess of 1 hour. And I think that you would all agree that we're doing our citizens a huge disservice if we are understaffed and expect them to wait in excess of an hour for a deputy to respond to their house. In exit interviews, this goes back to what the part of the conversation we were talking about earlier. Some of our deputies have indicated safety concerns due to a lack of backup as a reason for leaving. And not necessarily a lack of backup, but the distance and the time that's required for backup to travel to their location. We have currently no specialized traffic enforcement unit, and traffic enforcement is done in the few minutes that a deputy has between the time they're running call to call and completing their incident reports and all the other ancillary duties that they're assigned. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with traffic fatalities that are up by nearly 90% over the past 5 years. And this plan would actually include the addition of 2 specialized traffic enforcement deputies and additional uniform patrol deputies for peak coverage hours to help augment our patrol deputies and hopefully drive those response times down. Any questions on this slide? That's it, folks. Thank you for your time and your attentiveness. Thank you for the what I consider to be very meaningful dialogue. And thank you again for your willingness to work with us over the last 4.5 years collectively and individually, and for all that you've done for us and continue to do.
Sheriff?
Appreciate you getting us all keyed up for Matt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mr. Pickens, to answer your question, Denise did this in her head, but an average deputy sheriff with all the benefits, insurance, everything included, it's about $60,000, $58,000 to $60,000 a year is what it costs us.
I have a question for you real quick. On your operating expenses, I see we only have one line budget requested. Can we go back and add a line of what we currently have budgeted for 2020, 2021, and then what the increase in budget? Pick out page 38 if you want. I'll just take that for example. And all I want to see is if you can add a line in there, what your current operating expenses are to where your projected operating expenses are.
So
Could that be done?
I can't give you a complete answer of what that's going to be, but some of the things that are really plaguing us right now, where we see that operating is going to absolutely tank this year, is obviously in fuel purchases between
I see that. That's what I'm looking for.
tires,
Yeah.
ammunition. As we all know, those of us who own firearms and shoot ammunition has gone up exponentially. General supplies has gone up exponentially. For a box of gloves that we were paying $2.50 for, we're now paying over $9 a box for. Of course, hand sanitizer, jail medical supplies, sanitation supplies for the increase in sanitation. And one of the big ticket items that, I don't remember who it was, someone had made a comment about one of the air conditioners that we'd replaced. As you're all aware, it has always been, or at least since I've been around over the last 20 or so years, it has always been a practice for the sheriff's office to assume the majority, at least, of the building maintenance on a facility that's actually owned by the county, or more specifically, the Port Authority.
Right.
And those get rather costly, and it poses a significant impact to our budget.
All right, thank you, Sheriff.
Just for
One more thing.
1 year,
You
Mr.
never
Harvey,
mentioned insurance costs,
Yes.
health insurance.
health
Do
insurance?
you have any health insurance cost increases figured in at all? Are you looking at anything?
We were advised that at the current time, they didn't see any increases in the health insurance, so we used the existing year's
Okay.
figures.
So you're not anticipating any?
But they do pay
They
their.
will need to anticipate. We have not gotten from the subcommittee or our broker carrier what the insurance, as we told the board, we're expecting about a 10% increase. At this time, we do not know that final number.
And this does not include that increase.
Right.
But there is, you do pay your staff more than what the county pays on insurance, so.
Yes,
if there's a
that's-
modest increase, it could be absorbed in some of those, so.
That's
Just maybe, I'm not,
We pay about $1,200
$1,200
extra a year.
extra a
Than
year
what the
towards
county-
our employees' health insurance.
okay.
To answer your question, Mr. Harvey, I only have 1 year, but the increase in operating from 21 to 22 is about 400,000.
I just wanted to see if there was any high-ticket items per line, that's all.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much, we appreciate it. We're going to take a 3-minute break while we're ready for the clerk of the court to come. waiting for a few more people to come back off a break, so we'll be getting started in just a second. Y'all might want to. The sheriff would encourage you to look over your stuff, and if you have more questions, get with the sheriff individually, or we can do another meeting. I don't have a problem with that. I'm sure this is just part one of many meetings we're going to be trying to have pretty soon. Julianne, not to put you on the spot, but told Mr. Suggs I would do this. If you could share our tentative net number that we were given the other day, I think that would be very helpful. There is a caveat on GP incentives, so, but just the net number that we
Net expected revenue increase for the general fund?
tentatively, very.
Tentative proposed net increase for the general fund is 1.7 million.
Okay. So that's if we keep the millage rate the same, everything stays the same, that's what we would expect to, that could be a very cautious number right now.
And what was it, what was the total last year?
Total budgeted revenue, sir?
No, I think he's asking
Total,
what the increase.
total revenue.
Budgeted revenue and ad valorem for the general fund was 41.3.
Yeah, we're only talking ad valorem, we're not going to talk the whole, all the,
Other revenue.
but this is,
4% increase.
okay. All right. The Honorable Clerk of the Court, Matt Reynolds, is with us today.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for having this meeting. It's going to be a little bit different sitting on this side of the dais than it was last year when I was sitting on the other side of the dais. So
Does it hurt any, or is it?
No.
No,
No,
okay.
no,
Okay.
no, it's good.
Okay,
I
good.
enjoy it. I'm still glad to be here, obviously, even though the role has shifted a little bit. I didn't put together a PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to try to put all of the information related to my appropriation request this year kind of in a letter format, and then I'll just run through the letter format real quick this morning. Before I start talking about our appropriation request, I want to take a brief moment and thank the Commission and residents of Putnam County for putting your trust in me to be the next clerk of the circuit court and comptroller. I have some really big shoes to fill with Mr. Tim Smith retiring. I think we all know him very well and know the things that he put in place for the clerk's office, some very good things. And so I have a lot to build upon and a very good base. So I also want to mention, and I put in here, and it's kind of bold in that second paragraph, I want to express, my dedication and commitment to being as open and honest and transparent as I possibly can with the Commission and the residents of Putnam County. I heard a statement at one of the new clerk academies here recently from another clerk, and they actually sent me a nice little wooden a plaque that has this statement on it, and I put it at the front of my desk because it kind of summarized what I really truly believe all of us that are in public service should take to heart, and it's we're public servants. Our every action shall be dedicated protecting, preserving, and enhancing the public trust. And so that really struck a chord with me, and I just felt that I should really put it in the letter and bring it up. I try to bring it up at each of the swearing-in ceremonies at Willaca, Pomona Park, the different municipalities that I've gone and sworn in new commissioners and council members at. So I think it's a very good statement. So having just taken office several months ago, I'm still in the process of getting accustomed to all of the various duties and responsibilities of the clerk. Have already begun restructuring, reorganizing a little bit. I have some of my staff here with me this morning. I have Logan Becker. She is my Chief Administrative Officer, and she oversees the departments that are basically non-court related. So Clerk to Board department that Ashley is a member of. She oversees that department, Record Center, Customer Service, and Finance Department. And I have Susan Frank, our Finance Director, here with us today as well. So real quick, and I've also got this near the bottom of the first page of my letter. In regards to personnel counts for next fiscal year, I'm not proposing any additional positions. Hang on a second. Mute. Speakers are on for some reason. So yeah, that was my machine because I have it connected. I've turned it off. Okay. So on page basically 4, I attached a proposed staffing plan, and it kind of shows what we had budgeted for fiscal year 2021, and we had throughout all of our funds we had 62 full-time equivalents budgeted, and the way I showed it this year is obviously different than the way it was showed in the past. We've kind of broken them down into the different funds, whether those positions are funded by the board or funded by the state or funded by our records modernization fund. And I also changed the categories a little bit to kind of make it a little more, to kind of show the hierarchy of what I'm planning to do in restructuring and reorganizing the office in a listed categories such as executive staff, and over to the side in parentheses, I kind of listed the titles of those. So, for example, Logan that's here with me today, she's Chief Administrative Officer. She is one of 2 that I have in the executive staff category. I also have a Chief Court Officer that oversees the court operations. But then you can see administrative staff, management staff, professional staff, and career staff. And so I kind of want to follow that structure when I come to you guys every year with the appropriation request, so you can kind of see any proposed changes in personnel funding. And I thought it would be good to break it out with board funding and state funding. That's something that I saw in previous budget presentations. It wasn't very clear. The clerk is the one constitutional officer that is, well, each one is kind of funded a little differently. Tax collector is fee-based, and but when it comes to the clerk, we get a significant portion of our annual budget from the state in order to run our court operations, and they have a very strict narrow list of things that can be spent on or that their money can be spent on doing. And so what we started to do earlier this year is work on looking at an assessment and subsequent reallocation of personnel costs between our state funding and our board side funding. And we started doing that because back in early February, so I'd been in office about a month, I got word from one of the state agencies that oversees our funding that Putnam County was on the list to undergo an audit by the Department of Financial Services. And that audit is strictly going to be based on what we're spending the state funding on for court operations. So we've already gotten that list from those state auditors just recently, just several weeks ago. And we're providing them with some of that information. But in talking with the state agency that oversees our financing, they said one of the top findings that other clerks' offices have is the allocation of personnel between board side funding and state side funding. So we wanted to kind of go through that. We were looking at prior allocations, and it wasn't very clear how those allocations were being determined on how certain staff were divvied up between court-side funding and state-side funding. And so Mrs. Becker went through a pretty extensive research with all the department heads, looking at case counts, specifically what employees touch what sort of cases, and we're still probably going to have to build upon that. I'm not sure we'll ever get it 100% right unless we start having employees literally every day, what hours they worked on. Were you working on court-side stuff, or were you working on board-side stuff? But we went through this effort to try to get ahead of the game before the Department of Financial Services came in, and as a result of that, the number one impact that's shown on the table on page 2, that's called reallocation, that was a $40,884 impact. And so that's a direct offset. So on the next page, you'll see that on the state side funding for courts, it's reduced by $40,884, and it increases, unfortunately, on the board side, $40,884. I was hoping the opposite would be true, but that was not what the numbers shown after we had done some research on it. So that one is one that I think we are going to need no matter what in order to be doing things properly with state side funding. And then to talk about the other impacts, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Number 2 is an FRS increase, $18,311. And again, these numbers in that table on the second page is just for board side impact. So 18,311 for FRS increases. Number 3 is the 10% health insurance increase that we just had a discussion about with the sheriff. That's 19,439. And then number 4 is a request from me for a 3% cost of living adjustment for staff. And I put that in there, and the last paragraph on that second page, I kind of elaborate on why I think that that's important. I mentioned just recently in early May, Warren Buffett, which I'm sure most of you know who Warren Buffett is, a legendary Wall Street investor and businessman, mentioned that in his business that they're seeing higher prices from suppliers, which they are in turn obviously passing that off into higher prices on what they are charging, and that his statement was that these prices are being accepted. Well, he didn't come out and say that he thinks that this is short-term or long-term inflation. When he says prices are being accepted, that kind of indicates to most people that they think that those prices are here to stay, which is quite concerning. But also, something that the Federal Reserve also reported was CPI was up 4.6% in just the month of April, which is a tremendous jump. Also, the state of Florida this year is going to a minimum wage for their state employees of $13 an hour, which I know we just talked about the state constitutional amendment going to $15 an hour within 5 years, but the state got ahead of it a little bit this year, and they went to $13 an hour for all state employees. So kind of all of those factors, I think I would be derelict in my duties of overseeing my staff if I didn't at least request it, although I know I've sat through the board workshop, at least a portion of it the other day. I know where board funding is at. I'm fully cognizant of that. But I did feel that I needed to put that request in there.
Mr. Adams, Mr. Rawls has a question.
Okay. I looked up CPI for May, it was 4.2%, and for anybody that doesn't understand, if the 3% cost of living adjustment is not even a true cost of living adjustment,
Right.
To keep up with CPI, and if we don't do this for all the employees in the county, then they're going backwards, and we will start losing staff at a much more rapid rate, but we are doing them a disservice, and I think you're absolutely correct. I can't find anybody in the construction world that's screaming about the price increases. They're rolling over. Housing prices are going up. Everything's adjusting to it, and the prices are just out of control. So I have no problem whatsoever with what you've proposed.
Mr. Adams,
Does that $13 an hour affect your staff? Is there, so you're not, none of them are considered state, even though the funding comes from?
Correct, yeah, none of them are considered state.
Thank you.
Matt, I have a question for you. Is this 3% across the board on all staff? You did hear the sheriff's department set a level. Is
Yeah,
that
this will be all staff in order to avoid compression issues, and that's something else that we're going to look at when we look at restructuring and changing some titles around to reflect the actual duties that, that my staff is doing. Right now, what I've seen so far is basically all of our staff is kind of either a supervisor or what's called a court clerk. And I want to add in some differentiation to those. Doesn't necessarily mean that the pay will change, but I want the titles to reflect what they're already currently doing, whether they're managing or supervising, that sort of thing.
One last question from me on that. I like the way you did your reallocation. I think that's good, and I think going forward, you're going to figure out, I mean, there's no sense having an employee sitting there half the day doing nothing, and that's what these numbers kind of show. So if you had one employee on the court side just sitting there, that's kind of crazy. But I think as you go forward, you'll see that maybe that one employee can do more, you know, as attrition happens, then that'll lean over to that side of the court a little easier for you. Mr. Turner, you have a question?
Oh, yeah, are you about done with your presentation? I want to talk about the weekly versus
That's what I wanna
bi-weekly
do.
Yep, I was going to bring that up. I was going to get through the presentation and kind of talk a little more.
I wouldn't, if you're done with your presentation, I'll start on that. Go ahead.
Well, let me explain, right now at this point in time, on the state side funding, which is on the next page down, that table on the third page, shows those impacts for FRS, health insurance, and 3% cost on the state side. Right now, we still don't know whether we're going to get that funding from the state. It's still kind of too early in the game, and so that's why I wanted to show the board the total impact of both of them, because the way the state funding works is we can request that funding of the state, but if they don't give us that funding, it has to be absorbed by the board. And so, but again, it's still too early in the game, so it's really kind of, at this point in time, both impacts together until we know we've secured state funding for those increases as well. So, but yeah, again, the last thing that I will bring up is the need for looking at weekly versus bi-weekly. And, yep, Commissioner Turner, that's the first thing. And let me just say that this is something that Susan can speak to as well. This is something that as soon as I became clerk, and even right before I became clerk, I was approached by staff down there with the need to have a second individual doing board side payroll. And so there is an additional cost with that. In order to transition that person over doing payroll, I basically lose one staff in finance, which already they're already busy enough. And so I am as conservative as I can be. That's why I didn't just outright request an additional position. I wanted to talk to the board about it. One way to avoid having that additional cost is going to biweekly pay. And so that will allow me to hold the line on FTEs and still deliver, you know, services as efficiently as I can.
Mr. Clerk, I think the problem is you got a lot of people that have read this really quick and get it really quick, and they're wanting to get there really quick with you, and
Yep.
you're trying to explain it for the public. So we appreciate it, but
Yep.
Mr. Turner, go ahead and,
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that this is early for all of us. We don't have revenue projections. You don't know how much the state's gonna give you. We have this
Yeah.
possible revenue projection, which right now is the first time I'd heard of it. When did we get this?
last week, what?
The property appraiser sent it out late last week, what the estimated
June
assessment
1.
values would be.
Okay, well, I would've liked to known about it, but that's fine. I guess I told you about it.
No, I just got the number this morning, so.
So it's been secret up.
Mr. Chairman,
I just got it.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the blame for that. I was on vacation when it came in, and I did not have it forwarded out. That's my bad.
Okay.
She was
So-
still
so
doing
it came to you basically while you was gone?
That is correct.
That's, yeah,
Okay.
And she
comes
was
into
doing
the
the math
administration.
over
See,
there.
that's a good reason, Mr. Suggs. Okay, But anyhow, it's pretty early in this whole process. We know it. This ain't your first barbecue. You
That's
used to
right.
do it for this side, so. The thing I would like to talk about is, though, is the bi-weekly thing. I think we have employees in this county that can't do that. I'm just telling you right now. Me, I don't care. Pay me once a month. I don't care.
Right.
But there's people in this county, and a lot of them, that cannot go 2 weeks without a paycheck. I mean, they just can't. It's like the people that work for Les's guys in the roofing business. My son-in-law's, he's got to loan them money on Thursday because they don't get their check on Friday where they have enough gas to get to work the next morning. I don't care if you double their check. He still have to loan them $20 on Thursday to get them to work on Friday morning. That's just part of what's going on. So I'm not saying anything good or bad. I'm just saying that's the actual reality of it. So if we have been successfully paying them by the week, I understand it'd be less work to pay them bi-weekly, but if we've been doing that successfully for all these years, do you really think that it's absolutely necessary that we hire another person in order to continue doing what we've been doing? We haven't raised that many, there ain't that many more people.
Yes, sir, but, and Susan Frank can probably explain the amount of work that goes into that. We have one employee right now that has been doing weekly payroll. When we've got one employee that's doing it, if they're out sick, if they take a vacation, if any sort of thing like that, they basically have to be there every single day, no matter what, in order to do payroll.
So you don't have anybody that can back them up, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
for when they're
but
on
we do have a
vacation.
backup, but then that takes them away from their other normal duties. And so in moving that person over to be really the second person doing payroll, it puts a strain on the other operations of the office. And that's why I didn't come in with a recommendation saying, I'm going to bi-weekly payroll. But I also didn't come in saying, I got to have another person. I wanted to have this discussion with the board and see where the board
I appreciate your conservative view
stands.
of this and your conservative approach. I appreciate that. So, but still, if you're the public looking in, a lot of times they say, well, they've done it like this for years and years and years. We haven't raised the amount of employees that we've had that much for the last few years. How come all of a sudden we need another $60,000 a year person in order to do the same job we've been doing for the last few years? That's what somebody on the outside is going to look in and say.
Right. And there's other reasons why we've gone to the new system with time treks and things like that. And doing payroll is not as simple as it used to be. There's always new federal laws coming out regarding payroll. And so it is requiring more time in order to run the payroll for the same amount of people. So there are other external factors that are impacting the workload on it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rawls?
So we're looking at a 4% increase in revenue potentially, 4% cost of living, higher than that, or 4% inflation, so that's pretty much net zero. One of the things that I didn't hear discussed was the potential of bringing on a OIG. And that position has potential of actually creating revenue or not creating revenue, but saving money. Where are we at with that?
I have that in the budget, but in order to keep the same amount of FTEs, as you'll notice, I don't have a chief deputy clerk, and there's a reason I don't have a chief deputy clerk. I wanted to create those savings in order to be able to establish an OIG, and I through holding the line at the same amount of FTEs, I believe I do have the ability within the current budget to be able to establish that.
And have you guys done any brain straining to come up with a solution to getting to the biweekly payroll, but being able to help the folks that would have a struggle getting there? Because I don't think we're talking about, I would imagine less than half of the employees, but have y'all come up with any creative solution that we could get them to?
Well, I wanted to have this conversation with the board first and see
I
where
wrote down,
the board felt on that, and
pay
then once.
$60,000, or we can pay $60,000, and if we pay the $60,000 and it gets everybody over the hurdle, that's a one-shot deal. Otherwise, it's $60,000 in perpetuity.
Right.
So
And we'll be happy to do that if that is what the board wishes to do. Again, I want to work with the board on that and see where the board stands on just kind of what path they want to take
I
first.
personally
And it's
want
not
to see-
just something that I envision we're going to flip a switch and
Right.
immediately go to biweekly. This will be something that we plan out in advance if that's, you know, the direction the board.
You know, if we were to do some sort of a loan that can be recouped either over a long period of time with the employee or on their exit with their final paycheck, there's a lot of different things we can do. But I think, I personally would like to see us save that $60,000, go to biweekly. I always hated getting the weekly paycheck stuff. I just threw in the desk. But I think that would, and it'd probably save us money on the banking end too, wouldn't it? Because we're not processing payroll.
As many checks, yeah. There are some other hard costs that obviously we don't have many people that are on actual paper checks anymore, but the stubs and.
But you still pay for a transaction for electronic payment?
Yep.
I think-
But they're minimal cost, yeah. It's more in the time, the reconciliation and everything that has to be done on a weekly basis versus doing it, you know, every other week.
And then, what about shifting software? Because there was some discussion about the payroll module. Is there any potential cost savings there if we looked at that, going that now, or?
At this point in time, I haven't explored it far enough to really know if there will be. That's something that I want to start looking into is on our final page. You'll see I added a breakdown of the 4 different funds that
The tiny number?
Yes, I know.
You know, they
Okay,
have
it
this thing
didn't print
called
out.
Landscape, and you can
I
actually.
did. I did. I guess it didn't print. When I printed it out, it's a little bit easier. I actually put it on 8.5 by 14 in my office, and so it's much easier to read. But when I printed it this morning, it printed on 8.5 by 11. But I guess when I sent it over as PDF, it printed it out, and yeah, it didn't print it out the right way.
Okay.
So I wanted to show the different funds that the clerk's office has, and we actually have 2 funds
Mr.
that are
Chairman?
called.
Hang on, Mr. Adams, has, are you
Okay.
done?
I'm good.
Yeah,
Mr. Adams,
I'll just second what Mr. Rawls said. I'm all for biweekly if it saves us 60 grand. And the OIG, that was gonna be one of my questions that I wrote down for the end, so you answered that, thank you.
Mr. Turner?
You know, for some of the commissioners sitting up here today to say that they're champion of the people and then they don't want to feed them every week, that's just amazing to me. But is there a possibility that we could look at the lower paid workers and pay them weekly and maybe pay the higher paid workers bi-weekly? That would be a savings for less deal. And also, have we ever looked into using a private payroll service to do our payroll like some larger corporations and businesses do, and what the cost of that would be versus what it's costing us in-house to do it? I don't know if that's an option or not, but I know a lot of your larger corporations, they
They do
don't
that.
do in-house payroll. They hire an outside service.
And I'll elaborate on that a little bit because we actually looked at that at the city of Palaca. And what we found at the city of Palaca is those firms charge you on how many times you pay. So if you do 52 a year, it's basically twice as much as doing it 26 times a year. And that was the one thing we saw at the city of Palaca early on, and we approached the city commission about that several different times. Since then, the city has gone to biweekly, but I think Mr. Suggs and I even brought it to the board once. I had brought it to the board before Mr. Suggs was there. And it was always looking at going privatizing the payroll. It was not feasible to do so in order to save costs unless we went to biweekly. That's where we got the largest amount of savings, was having 26 a year instead of 52. And to your other point about looking at paying certain people maybe under a certain amount, that's something I can discuss with staff. It's something that we haven't discussed yet, to talk about the logistics of how that would operate and if it would be feasible and how complicated it would be. And Susan's saying she doesn't even know if our current software would let us break out different groups of people, because the way that software is set up right now is we really have 2 different libraries. So even though clerk staff is paid bi-weekly, we're in a whole separate library, and I have to have a whole separate login to get into the software on the AS400 to see the clerk side, and then a separate login to see the board side. And right now, everybody on board is weekly. So we can explore that, though. We can look into the options if we can do
I guess I'm just
that.
trying to come up with suggestions other than just not paying. Some of the individuals in the lower paid category, I'm telling you, they would have a lot of difficulty, even to the point where they may just up and hunt another job immediately that pays weekly. And that's the
I
last
understand.
thing we want to do is put them in a position where they just can't make it. You know, so I would like to maybe look at that during this process. Like you said earlier, and I alluded to, it's too early in the process to know exactly where all
Right.
this is gonna shake out, but, this is more or less just an informational meeting today, letting us know about where you are, and like the sheriff was, and tomorrow's gonna be the same thing. And so maybe we could look at that and look at, if we went bi-weekly on the other ones, maybe we could, farm that out to you know, the bi-weekly
save some-
stuff,
yep.
somebody else, and
Yep.
then just continue doing the lower income, paychecks in the county weekly, continuing like we are now, but then it'd be less work because there's less people and less, you know, taking care of it. So, I don't know, just,
Yep.
I'm just
We'll-
trying to come
we'll
up with an
definitely-
option. I think it's so important that we continue paying the, lower paid individuals in the county weekly. I just think it's a very important option.
We'll definitely go back and look at the logistics of, and try to think outside of the box and see if there's other ways that we may be able to do that, and look at the actual cost savings, if there'll be cost savings, if there's a way to do that,
One
so.
last comment, and then I should be done. You mentioned your ombudsman a minute ago, that you're thinking about getting one of them, and you decided not to do a deputy clerk, but instead you did 2 administrators instead of the deputy clerk. So if you didn't do the ombudsman, basically you wouldn't need all this additional money that you're asking for this year, that you're gonna use to basically fund your ombudsman with.
It'd be part of it, not all of the increase, yeah. And then I would be, down one
A
staff.
substantial part of it, yeah. But you're gonna be down that staff person anyhow, because your ombudsman's not gonna do the stuff that your deputy administrator used to do.
Well, yeah, the FTE counts will stay the same, that's correct.
Yeah.
And it may not even be an employee, it may actually be a contract with say, an auditing firm that comes in and does that, because having a firm on board that has multiple different employees with multiple different specializations and different categories, different areas, is probably a better benefit than having just one single person that has to try to learn everything that there is when it comes to all of the different areas of the county and the clerk's office.
Okay, I'm just trying to bring that up to light, that, you know, the, hiring an ombudsman, we're gonna have to pay extra here for you to be able to do that, whether it's a firm or an ombudsman or
Yep.
whatever, so.
Well, one thing I'd like to say in regards to that is, the more that I researched about it and the more that I read the Constitution of the state and the state statutes, that is a duty that the clerk and the comptroller is charged with, providing independent oversight, and those reports come directly back to me, and they would come directly back to the board for the board to either take action, or if they don't agree with the findings of the audit, then the board doesn't have to take action. It's not an OIG or an internal auditor is not somebody that has any sort of control over operations. They can't stop projects. They can't. They basically look back and they see whether policies are being followed, and I've heard you bring it up before about looking at the procurement policy, looking at some of our other policies. It doesn't matter necessarily who's sitting in the seat, but it's are they following those policies or not? And really the only way to ever know if that's happening is to have somebody independent that takes a look at that. And so that's why the more that I've read about it and the more that I thought about it, it's a duty that I'm specifically charged with in the Constitution, and I feel that I really need to have that. If not, just
I'm good with that, Matt.
I understand.
My whole point here is that I just want everybody to understand the dance, and the dance is, yeah, we're gonna raise our budget at the clerk's office, but we're gonna hire an ombudsman or an agency or whatever, so you can say what you want, but that's the dance. The dance is we're gonna fund that position by not cutting that from the budget, or we would, and doing this other. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna do an increase, and what it all boils down to is the increase, or part or some of the increase gonna come because, you feel the need to hire an ombudsman.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I created the savings by not hiring in another position that I didn't feel I needed.
Yeah, and we can continue to dance if you
All right,
like, but I
I'm just
mean,
saying.
So what happened to the idea that it was his discretion once we give him the budget? I mean, that's what we said at the end of
Clerk,
the
I have a
sheriff's
question
meeting.
for you.
Sure.
Okay. Along the lines, and Mr. Adams-Ack will be next, and then Mr. Ross. Along the lines of biweekly payroll, I do kind of agree with Commissioner Turner that there's people out there. I think they can be incentivized, as Commissioner Rawls alluded to. I know when I did it in my office, you know, I had a lot of pushback, but the minute we did it, we didn't really see any major hurdles. We still had some people that, yeah, I had to loan them, instead of $20, I loaned them 40 for a couple weeks until they got their self patterned. And I think that, I don't want to say that we should take 30,000 or 60,000 and say, you know, that's the number we're going to help you get over, and then we're never going to see that number again. I don't know if it's going to be that much. I think with the proper training and a drop date certain that we're going bi-weekly. But would it help? Let me say this. If you can come back and say, here's what we did at City of Palaca, here's what we saw. Yeah, we saw 2 people that needed some assistance, but it wasn't that much, and what that assistance would look like. And number 2, would it be easier? And I've said this from day one, I would love to go bi-weekly payroll since the time I got here, but would it be easier for just to pay us on a monthly basis and be done? Would that be something that would be a whole lot easier than the weekly, or just lump us all into bi-weekly at one time and we're all good? I'm fine with either way. It doesn't bother me, you know.
Do you mean all board employees or just
I'm talking about us
the board,
5, but
the board
if
yourself? Yeah.
if I think I saw Susan's head going, it ain't gonna make a whole lot of difference for 5 or 10.
probably more work.
Yeah, probably more. So if you need to lump us into bi-week, I'm good with all that. I'm fine with that.
I just wasn't interpreting what you were saying correctly, because my first thought was that you meant all employees. And,
No.
you know, with the union contracts, that
Right.
definitely would not be a
Yep.
possibility
understand
to do that. But again, it's the logistics of separating out just a small group. You know, obviously the system has the ability to do weekly and bi-weekly payroll, but I'm not quite sure with the logistics of separating out groups of people.
And Matt, one more question. I know this is very, very early, and Commissioner Turner is right, and these numbers are just going to be flying off the chart all over the place for the next few months. You're 7 months into your fiscal year, so do you have any idea, have you looked at any of the numbers on what the offset might be coming back to the county at that point?
Yeah, so part of our board side funding in the board fund is based on user fees and whatnot. So, for example, this year, tax deed sales are up quite a bit. But expenses, on the other hand, for tax deed sales are up quite a bit because of that. But we do make some margin on that, but it's hard to know whether that's going to continue or not. Correct. That's going to be something that Mrs. Becker and I look at over the next several months before we finalize our budget as well, is all of the different revenue streams. And because of COVID and because of the way that the court processes were shut down, it has kind of affected the timing of our revenue. So it's hard to say, like when the foreclosures and the evictions. Now that we just received word, when was that, yesterday or late Friday, that the Supreme Court has lifted all of the mandates on the court system itself. And so the speedy trial aspect is about to start up again. But I don't know when the foreclosure and eviction floodgate is going to open. But I know in talking with my chief court officer yesterday or the day before yesterday, she's very concerned about the civil department, which we only have 3 employees in, and the amount of foreclosures and evictions, they have several hundred, from what I understand, waiting.
How many?
Several hundred.
Oh,
Sure. I'm sure there's going to be more than that.
Yeah, and there will be more that haven't even been filed yet because people haven't wanted to pay that filing fee to file it yet, but as soon as they can, I think that's really going to be a large, so it's kind of we're kind of like county staff is trying to wait on information from the state and wait on more information up until as late as we possibly can so that we have an accurate number on revenue. And I'm hoping that revenue does go up, or at least we can estimate revenue goes up, and it may offset some of this increase. But
I
as
think
we
you're right. I
discussed,
think
it's a little early.
we're going to be headed in a downward spiral with this eviction thing. I think we're going to see a lot of homeless folks that maybe had the ability to pay rent that haven't.
Yep.
And the landlords are going to be very quick to find somebody else there. Thank you, Clerk, and I'll call on Mr. Adamsack and Mr. Rawls next, and Mr. Pickens after that.
I'd like to see a relook at like ADP paychecks. I mean, there's like 30 some, there's more than that. There's hundreds of companies now that are doing payroll services. So their costs I know have gone down because they can buy, like part of your problem is the IT and the maintenance on the software and everything else.
Right.
They can buy that stuff in bulk, so their cost savings are considerable over governments, especially a small government like ours and a small office like yours. So I'd love to see you do that. I mean, it's up to you what you do.
Yep.
And again, bi-weekly, if that saves you on that side as well, I'm all for it.
I leaned in and asked Mr. Suggs if there's any way that we could do something along the lines of something that's non-taxable and where there's no FRS, no other labor burden attached to it. So if an employee's taking home $350 a week, they would give them a one-time loan at $350. Put this out and let it be the option of the employee to take that, and then come up with a way to be able to recoup that over a period of time, so we could show it as revenue coming in, doesn't have any detrimental impact to our budget, and take a look at something like that.
I'll take a look at that. At the city, it was a little bit different because we had our own pension fund, but here being in FRS, I don't
This would be a
nuances.
loan, because they're still going to get, so if I'm right now, we're going to get a paycheck next week, and then we'll get one the week after. So if we say you're not getting a paycheck next week, you're going to get 2 paychecks the week after. But they need to get over this hump. That's what I'm saying, is we loan them the money equal to what they would have taken home, but that loan has no tax implications.
Right.
And then they pay it back, so it was truly a loan with no interest. We're made whole. They don't suffer any economic impact whatsoever.
Right.
then
And
we're
I'm
off
just
and running.
running through different things in my mind right now. We do have the experience pay program that some people take as a lump sum, some people take as rolling it into their check. I know the board in the past has done one-time bonuses, but we could look at, if we plan it far enough in advance, we could try to get, instead of that experience pay being given on whatever their anniversary date is, we could look at doing it on the off week of whenever we go to bi-weekly.
Does everybody
and then
get
it
the
kind of
experience
offsets.
pay every year?
What's that?
Does everybody get experience pay? If that can be, that's fine. There's no tax implications on that? Is that considered income?
Yeah, it's considered pay. It's part of their
What I'm talking
pay,
about is
so
something
yeah.
completely different. I'm talking about a one-time loan with no
That
tax
then they
implications.
pay back over time. Okay.
Right. So
I'll look into
at
the
end of year,
ability if
there's
we
no-
can do
there's no
that.
difference in payroll.
But most of the employees on the board get their experience pay added into their check. They don't get a one-time check. So most of your board employees have chosen
But
just
what
to
I'm- what I'm-
spread
what I'm-
their experience pay into their check.
What I'm saying is, if we decided to go with the biweekly, when we decide to pull the trigger, if we go out to the employees and say, if this is going to be a negative impact on you or a burden, we'll offer to loan you the net 1 week of pay, and then we'll take that out over the next 12 weeks or
That's possible.
20, something like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it's a
Just
lot of
have any-
tracking, but
Yeah.
it would be feasible.
Mrs. Becker just mentioned to me that at the city, the way they did it was, instead of giving raises for that year, they went with a flat bonus, and then they paid that bonus on that week, and so everybody
week
got
you
that
start
same
out.
amount. So even your lower paid employees, if it was a $500 bonus for that week, that might be more than what they normally get
Right.
on a week. And then your higher paid employees, which should be able to absorb changing over to biweekly, might be lower than their normal weekly, but
The other
that's
half
how
of
they
it's educating.
transition.
We've got to educate the staff that when you do get this 2-week check, it's going to be twice as much as you normally get. You got to hold on to half of it. It's got to last you twice as long. That's the second part of it.
All right, Mr. Pickens?
Yeah, you're answering most of the questions. I was wondering if you could use the experience to pay, maybe to bridge that gap. But anyway, Susan, you mentioned the union employees. How are they paid, and how would that affect? Would you have to go back to
No,
negotiate with
they're
the?
paid weekly, like all board employees. I don't know those union contracts off the top of my head, but I would assume that you cannot pay them monthly.
They would have to be
We would have
renegotiated.
to look at
Okay, well,
that.
Yeah, anything
If we
affecting
did
those
switch, I mean, how would that affect, I mean, it sounds like you would like to do it all the way through or not at all.
It'd be easier for us to do it for everybody
For everybody.
bi-weekly, yes.
I would think if you allow impact bargaining on that specific portion of the wage package, and you address it with, this is how we're going to bridge the gap, they're not going to have any issue with it.
All right, Mr. Clerk, is there any last final statements you'd like to make on your presentation?
No, sir, just to say that I'll be sure to come back to you guys in your future budget meetings with any updates that I may have. I'll be sure to, as soon as I hear from the state, what we're not anticipating hearing what our final funding amount from the state will be until early to mid-August. So I'll get you that information as soon as I can on what any potential final impact may be, and we can have further discussions in the future about, funding for how we're going to handle payroll. So,
Well, thank you, Mr. Clerk, and I appreciate it, and
thank y'all.
we'll be looking forward to the future here. That kind of wraps up our presentation this morning. Commissioner comments on our agenda. We do have commissioner comments. I'll start with Commissioner Adamsack.
I'm all set.
Commissioner Turner?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. Yesterday during the meeting, and it takes a little while for this stuff to sink in with me, but yesterday during our meeting, we threw out the bids for public works, our workshop. We threw out the bids for public works, and we made the comment that there's probably something going on there that we're not seeing just yet that's making people not bid these projects, because especially like Point of Woods, for instance, you still can't convince me it costs $165,000 to put in 40 foot of culvert. You can't get me there. So I think what's happening is we're putting so much in the bid that's either not clear or definitive or something that is making people say, I've got to throw money at that or I can't bid it. So I think that's taking place, and if it is, we need to look at that, and we need to make sure that whatever's in there is clear and concise, and that there's no assumption that, well, if I upset somebody at Public Works or I upset somebody at maintenance or whatever, then they're gonna make my life miserable, because this clause says if the county deems this, then that could happen. We can't have that. It's got to be cut and dried. If you don't perform, this happens. If you do perform, this is what you give us. A bid should not be on a culvert or whatever the case may be, fixing an air conditioning unit. Whatever it may be, it shouldn't take a 100-page bid package to get somebody to change an air conditioning unit, or whatever trade along that is. And so I'd love to be able to go and talk to some of the guys that the bid package was sent to that decided not to bid it, and ask them why, because then you'll get the real story of why they didn't bid the job. But the guy that was low bid, or the company that was low bid, or the company that was even second low bid, they're not going to tell you anything, because they still want the job. As far as they're concerned, it's all great. But the 5 people that didn't bid it, that we sent it to, those were the ones I wish somehow we could talk to, because they'll tell you the truth. Well, I didn't bid that grading project because you had all this stuff in there that I couldn't put a price on, and I'm not willing to gamble my whole livelihood over if you get up in a bad mood that day, or whoever is in charge of that project gets up in a bad mood that day. And so we need to try to figure out how we can make this definitive. If you perform, you get paid. If you don't perform, if I want to buy a pencil from you, I'm making this too simple now, but if I want to buy a pencil from you, you give me a pencil. I want a number 2 pencil. I want it already sharpened, and then I'll pay you when you give me that number 2 pencil that's sharpened. Not that if the lead breaks a year and a half from now, we can still come back and go after you, even though it had nothing to do with the original deal. I'm oversimplifying, but we got some of that kind of stuff in there. It's not definitive. We need to put definitive things in the bids, and that way people will give us real prices for real work instead of what's going on now, that they're just throwing money at it. And at some point they're saying, okay, well, if I get it, fine, I'll take the risk. But normally, if all that risk wasn't in there, that they normally wouldn't have to take, then they might do the job for half the money. So I think some of that's going on. I don't think we're doing it on purpose. I really don't. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. I'm just saying we need to review stuff, because what we're doing right now is not working out for the county. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Turner, I'd like to comment on that too a little bit. I did reach out to a contractor who did not bid and told me they just didn't see it. I don't know the process. Julianne, I want to ask you this question along those lines. We're not mailing out to contractors. We're posting it out on bid, and they're looking for this, correct? Or are we mailing? Because if we're mailing, I think Commissioner Turner's hit the nail on the head from the comment I got this morning, was that the projects were over 100,000, and this board had decided, anything under 100,000 would be anything over 100,000 would be FDOT certified. So I kind of do need to know the process, like Commissioner Turner. Did we mail these out, or we just put them out for bid and be done with it? Or did we say over 100,000, you got to be FDOC certified?
And what site are we putting them on? If we're just putting them on a site, I don't even know what site.
Well, one contractor didn't
I'm
find
with
them.
Demand Star, and I'm with like 1, 2, 3, 4 different sites, and I haven't seen any of these projects come out.
And
So
one
I may not
contractor
be on the
didn't.
right side, I don't know. But we need to try and figure out, where we're putting them. And maybe we need to join a site that maybe is a little more widely viewed by contractors. I don't know.
Why don't you explain how we,
So every bid is posted on our website, advertised in the Plaquemine Daily News, and we use a bid management called Vendor Link. We can use any number of bid management softwares that you would like us to use, or multiple ones. At some point, it's simply setting up another file for each vendor. You will have multiple sets of email communication going out, so there's always a little bit of juggling to do. But that vendor link, we upload from our database vendors who have expressed interest in particular projects, and vendor link will automatically send that particular entity an email that says, this solicitation's on the street and you are interested in it. Again, we can do as many or as few as the board would like.
so we do, let me ask you this. So, for example, let's just say Ashley has her own contracting company. She's not FDOT certified. We saw that the bid,
We don't discriminate against FDOT certified when
don't
we
do that.
notice
So-
the bids.
So if it's over 100,000, Ashley would still get it even though she wasn't FDOT certified?
Yeah, because Ashley could come in at 99,999, and technically I'd take her as a
That's
non-FDOT
where I was
person.
going. Now, I did contact a contractor this morning. I've reached out to 2 more that were on our bid. I haven't heard back from them. One said, I just didn't see it. I didn't see it. And he would have bid on it had he seen it, he said. He just didn't see it. So,
Well, and not only that, I'd like to continue that conversation again. When we said that any project over
Yes.
$100,000 needed to be DOT, that, in my book, in my head, that was for paving projects.
Right.
well, and road building projects. So now it's road building, anything, if DOT has ever done it before in the past and have a thing on it, then all of a sudden, that got from that to $100,000 threshold. That wasn't my intent. I think that we need, if we have surety bonds on the projects and we have other things that are protecting the county, then I don't know why necessarily we need to use a pipe that's gold lined, that's 9 inches thick and elliptical and concrete instead of plastic and all these things that DOT specifies when it's a damn driveway. I'm sorry, it's a driveway.
Not gonna have 120
So,
cars, 1,000
I
cars a
mean,
day.
You know, I really hesitate saying things like, I wish I could, I'd like to run out and buy me, and rent me a backhoe and go put that in for $165. I'll start it on Monday.
rent
But
you
I
my
can't
backhoe.
do it, I mean, obviously, but, excuse me for being facetious,
No,
but.
you're right, you're
but
right.
that, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And we got to, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or whatever, if the county wanted to do air conditioning work, for instance, or do some small, whatever it is, they could, at that time, they could actually go out and they could contact a local sub and they could say, okay, if you were gonna paint this room, what kind of paint would you use? What would it be really good? Somebody they had confidence in, they worked with them all the time. Well, I understand, and I don't know if it's statute or procurement. I'm not sure which. If it's statute, we don't have a choice. If it's procurement, we need to change procurement. Because if we're dealing
Careful, you're
with,
starting to
if
sound
we're
like Jeff
dealing with a
Ross.
certain painter, and we know that painter to have a high reputation, then we ought to be able to call that painter up and say, okay, if you were gonna paint the boardroom, what kind of paint would you use? How many
Comes
coats would
design
you
build.
do? And then seriously, a 3-paragraph statement, they could give you full specifications on painting this room. And it would be specifications that everybody, then you could take that, put it on the street, and bid that, and everybody would bid it because they can read it and understand there ain't 106 pages of other stuff that could happen to you if you painted this room.
Right.
And so, I understand, and I know that if Julie had something to shoot at me, she would right now, but my whole point here is that I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just trying to say we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing and that we're not costing the county undue monies because we're trying to put in all scenarios that may or may not happen that could be better. I don't know what to do, but what we're doing right now is not helping, I don't believe it to be helping the county or the local vendors, either one.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Ross.
I get emails every day from different contract officers that are mostly military and VA, and they're just bid solicitations, and they have they go through the it used to be the System for Award Management, now it's something else, but they pull down a list of people that have the right NIAX code, and they say, you know, you dabble in this field, or are you interested in being in this project? It doesn't cost anything to send out something digitally, and if we could compile a list of vendors, you know, I know that the building department keeps a list of every construction trade that's licensed.
She does
and
that. Yeah,
so-
they do that. They do that.
If
do it back
we're
in
already doing that, and they're not responding, shame on them. Then the
Right.
other part is, I agree. I think that, to me, it's unpalatable to have to read through 110 pages of minutia, and when you really get to the meat of it, there's only like 4 or 5 pages that address the actual
Yeah.
things, and they didn't have.
Point.
There
That's
was
his point.
Yeah.
3
there was-
paragraphs and we're done.
So when I read that, I thought I wouldn't bid on this, and if I did, I'd just throw a jackass high number at it because if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. If you don't,
Exactly
you don't
my
want to deal
point.
with it. Yeah.
Exactly my point.
All are on the right page. Mr.
So,
Pickens, you
I'm not a contractor, and I definitely agree with them. With the contractors that do bid, do you have to be registered with the county, I mean, before you bid? I mean, okay, so you don't have to do that.
We don't have to know you from ever before or ever again. You can
But I
participate in
will,
the process.
I will tell you, and I bring contractors here that want to do business with the county, and all you gotta do is get with Desiree. And the contractor emailed Desiree, and she sets them up as a vendor, and life's good. They get it out.
Okay, so would the process of the Fort Gates ferry, I assume that's about to hit the streets or already did?
It's about to hit the streets in light of everything said. We can pull it if you'd like. I don't believe it has yet.
Not yet. It was scheduled to hit today, I believe.
Why do we want to pull it?
No, I just wondered, I just asking the question,
I want to pull it.
Well,
how it would be advertised in plaque of paper on the Putnam County website and then the other website that you use, is that correct?
yes, that's correct. And I think that, I asked the question in the beginning, and some of this is a circular reasoning, but if we take Fort Gates Ferry, we don't necessarily estimate that the entire bid's gonna come in over $65,000. That predicates whether or not we need a true formal solicitation. So in the world of procurement and in the world of your code of ordinances, if I'm under $65,000, I don't need a true solicitation. However, what staff heard from the board was they wanted it solicited. And so, again, it's circular reasoning. What staff believed you wanted was a full solicitation. So that is what they've prepared. If you don't want that many pages, then I can send out quotes. And if that's your end goal,
I want the
then
landing built, and then hopefully it's a local contractor that gets that. That's my point.
well, then we're in a situation where you ask us to procure the services according to code. But again, what staff heard, especially from Public Works, was you wanted it solicited, you wanted it bid. And when you tell them that, that's exactly what we've put together. They're doing their
What's the
best.
path of least resistance?
In this particular case, is to get 3 quotes.
I guess
Yeah,
I guess my point here is that I'm trying to make is that,
You need to speak in the microphone somewhere. I'm sorry.
my point that I'm trying to make here is that if we're going to do this and try to protect the county the best we can, to get the best price for the county, which is what I think my job is sitting up here, while trying to protect the county, we don't need to make it to the point, like Jeff said, to where a contractor looks at that and reads it and said, look, I got enough work, I'm not putting up with that, and so he throws it in the corner, and the only people you get bidding it are the 2 people in the world who either are so sorry they don't have no work, and so they're gonna go throw money as much as they can at this and hope that one of them stick. Now, that's the reality of it. It's just the reality of some of it's that everybody's so busy, some of it's they're not going to take on the jobs that don't make sense to them. And so you take a job like that. I'm in the business. I should get notifications from Demand Star, from contractors, the bulletin, from what was yours that you say?
Vendor link.
Vendor link, okay, well, I'm not on that one, but when St. Johns County decides to bid out a janitor's contract, I'm not exaggerating, I get an email that says St. Johns County's bidding out a janitor's contract. I delete the email, I'm not wanting to go sweep floors in St. Johns County, but I'm telling you, I get one for everything they do. Crescent City was doing it, different ones. A plaque, I'm pretty sure the plaque is using a different one. They're using something different. They're using now. The city is so. But I get when something. I'm telling you literally, if they.
I hear you. If hang on just a minute, and I think that my finger. When I
get it all the
came,
time. It's either that or that.
when I came, we used
That's when
nothing.
you're looking at her.
Say that again now.
When I came to the county, we used nothing for any sort of demand bid management situation. When I came to the county, procurement as a whole has a $0 budget. Vendor Link is the one I could talk into giving me the services for free. They essentially do the same function. And so we utilize them. They initiate an email to anyone. They give the option to the vendor to sign up. You can tell me you want every bid that comes out of Putnam County, or you only want the ones by your commodity. So it's functionality working the same way. Again, many years ago, I guess not that many, when I came, we attempted to revise the bid documents and draw down the number of pages that were in it. And there was a lot of pushback against that. So as of last night, I again went to Rich and said, okay, I think that it is time again. We can simplify this. It is in my best interest to have 22 vendors participating because then we get the best value. So I am always going to be an advocate for the vendors.
Julie, I used to do a lot of work for the county before I was a commissioner.
Okay.
Construction, roofing, back when I owned the roofing business, I used to do a lot of work for the county. Not once have I ever done a job that had an 82-page contract, or 82-page bid package. They called up and said, we want this done. I mean, when we remodeled full buildings for them, there'd be a 8-page packet. This is what we want. This is a list of what we want. Go do it. You're gonna have to supply a bond. You're gonna have to do these things. But it wasn't 106 pages. It just wasn't. And that's from my personal experience before I was a commissioner. Somehow we've gone from that within 5-6 years ago to the point we're at right now where we're bidding a project with a 100-page bid package. We've gotten there. I prove we've gotten there. So we've gotten there. So what we've got to do is try to figure out how to simplify the bids again to the point to where somebody knows what they're bidding on, furnishes a bond if we want one or if it's necessary, because if it's a $10,000 job, you don't want to just put it out to people that can get performance bonds, because that's also a tripping hazard for the county getting good work for lower price projects. You just,
Right, absolutely.
you know, it's a full-time job to keep a performance bond in place. And so for a smaller contractor, and I'm not going to name names, but for a smaller contractor that has absolute the ability to put in a smaller job like a culvert at Point of Woods, it's not that big a deal and it's not rocket science. There's at least a dozen local contractors that could do that job if we made it simple enough for them to be able to do it, and it wouldn't cost $165,000.
We are in process of getting those bid documents as of last night revised. We're going to take a look at them, what's needed we're going to keep in, and what can be removed. All the ancillary forms, they frankly don't need to be there, and I've said that for a very long time. We're going to get them taken out, and we'll figure out where we go from there. In the meantime, we do have a set of bids that are slated to go out. I don't think it's in our best interest to hold all of them up on a review process. But we will take direction from the board as far as the bid management system.
It could be, Julie, and the
Okay.
reason why I say it could be is if it's like the public works bid that went out, then, and everything is gonna come in at double or triple or quadruple what it should cost, and it damn sure is in our interest to stop them and take a look at it. I know that there's several bids that are hitting the street here in the next day or two, and some of them may have already, I'm not sure, but they're they're the same thing. There's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't mean anything, that's going to keep people from even looking at those projects. And so our pricing, therefore, is going to be 2 or 3 times the amount of money than back in the day. And I don't, like I said earlier, I don't know if it was statute or our ordinance that made it to where we couldn't go talk to somebody that would potentially bid the project and say, what do you think should be done? If we have confidence in them that they know what they're doing, paint this room. If you went to a local painter that you work for all the time and you say, what brand of paint is the best you can do? How many coats would you put on it? You know, what would you do? And so you basically get a 1-page bid spec on this is what we're expecting you to do.
And we created the ability for end departments to do that through our budgetary estimate process. So we have the ability to talk to Mr. Painter and say, my end goal is to make this room hot pink. Tell me how to get it there. And we can obtain a budgetary estimate, which does not preclude them from participating if that budgetary estimate predicates that we need a formal solicitation based on our procurement ordinance from participating in that process. As far as bid management systems, I'm happy to engage any or all of them that the board would like used.
Mr. Chairman, we heard loud and clear yesterday exactly the concerns that we're hearing again today. I think it's important that we remember the history of how we got to where we are. And history kind of dictated to where we are today. Now we need to go back and look at some of that and see where we've came from and where we're at today, and what do we need to adjust to get us to where we want to be tomorrow, which is
Yeah,
a much
absolutely.
easier process in order.
Pendulum swings, Terry.
Absolutely
At
it
one
does, and
time,
that's
it
that's
had
where we're
gone
at.
that direction, and something needed to be done, and so as
Yep.
it swung back up here to where everything costs 5 times what it should. Once it gets back down in the proper position, which we have the ability to do, but the first step is recognizing that the pendulum has swung too far in that direction.
And we don't disagree with that.
Get back down in a safe, convenient, cheap area.
Absolutely, and no one wants to do that,
Cheaper.
Board, you five in the
Cheaper
administration. So we just need to see where we're at now and what we need to adjust to get us there. We absolutely agree, but it was the history that got us where we are. We just need to
I
be
get it,
mindful of
Terry,
that.
and like I said earlier, I'm really trying not to be critical. I just don't know how to do this other than my same old blunt manner that I do things in, so
We're going to give
All right,
you a
Mr.
smaller
Pickens
hammer.
has the floor, so we're gonna,
I thought I did.
well, no, because
I'll let you borrow it for a
he
minute.
let
No,
you
you've
in
answered
on the
it. It's a
floor.
good conversation.
End of my comments, so y'all go right ahead.
Pickens has the floor.
No, just my comments, Matt and your staff, thank you for the presentation, and also Gator and his staff, so look forward to tomorrow.
All right, and I'm gonna wrap this.
9 o'clock tomorrow?
Yes, 9 o'clock tomorrow. Is there any, along the lines of bids that are going out, I want to ask 2 questions. Number one, is there anything that you think that we need to pull right now based on the minutia that's inside those contracts? Or do you think they're best to go out? Because I do agree with Mr. Turner that we could see a potential savings if we pulled back a little bit, waited a week, fixed everything up, and then come back. I don't know if that's a timeline that we could work with, 2 weeks. I'm just saying, is there anything that you can see right now? You mentioned Fort Gates Ferry that we would like to do, probably hit the brakes on that and go out for some quotes. Would that be beneficial right now? I heard
If the
that.
board agrees, I believe it would be beneficial, yes.
Okay, let's do, are we in agreement that we won't put Fort Gates out for bid? We'll just get some quotes? Is that what we're looking at?
That, we have the potential to do that because we do not estimate that work is going to be over 65,000. Now, if we get the first couple of quotes back and we're over 65,000,
can
then we
go
have
out
to
to
back
bid.
up and go to bid it.
Yeah.
As
Are we
far
in
as
agreement?
others,
Are we in all agreement?
What's the process of just receiving those quotes? How do you determine who's going to give those quotes?
3 people that are in.
yeah, the end department gives us it doesn't have to be just 3, but the end department, which would, in this case, would be Public Works, gives us a list of vendors that would be qualified to do the work that is called for, and then we would still email them out. It would just be a situation where we would say, here's what we're asking a quote to be completed by, here's the date I want it back by, and, you still have to have insurance, you still have to be licensed, you still have to be all of those things for the county.
Well, if I may.
You may.
While advertising in the local newspaper is legal, I've been in business for over 40 years and I have never got a job out of the newspaper. So I don't read every legal notice in every newspaper every day just waiting around to see if maybe we're gonna get a construction job or a roof or whatever out of it. So I understand we have to do that for legal, but you can't count that as advertisement if you're actually trying to get people to come do business with you.
And that's why we engage the bid management, which would solicit them. But again, if you prefer a different bid management as somebody in the industry, I'm absolutely open to engaging any of them.
How expensive are some of the other ones? You probably know off the top of your head. Are we talking thousands
I
of
don't know,
dollars?
and they vary. It's an annual charge, and it's based on how many users you're gonna let in the system, and that, how many bids you do per
Usually ain't
Mm.
year.
that much either, because most of them actually make the other side pay. Like Demand Star makes me pay every year to be a member of their service. I don't know if they make the other side pay too. I haven't got a clue.
They did years ago, but I don't know where they are right now.
There's
Okay, but
different
let's-
ones, but we need to do that.
We'll look at that. We'll certainly look at,
But the comment,
and
the
Star and all that.
conversation needs to be on Fort Gates Ferry right now. Are we going to tap the brakes on going out to bid? Or are we gonna go ahead and get quotes and see if it hits that threshold and then go out to bid? And that's what we all 4 need to decide right now. Mr. Pickens, it's in your district.
I think we need to look,
Go ahead.
I think we need to look at every project that either just hit the street or is gonna hit the street and see if there's anything in there that we think would prevent people from looking at it at a level.
I agree with that, but can we settle on Fort Gates and come back to every other one at that
I
point?
think we need to let Ms. Young have the opportunity to do as she feels with her
I'm good with
procurement
that.
staff, to go out and look and see what she thinks.
I'm good with
And
that.
handle it exactly like she just said. Go out and get some quotes. If they're over her threshold, then go through her procurement ordinance or bring it back to the board, at which time we're gonna have to state a public purpose, or it's gonna be front page of our next year's audit.
All right, then the chair will entertain a motion to make sure staff gets the direction and our audit is good, so let's entertain.
What would you like the motion to say? Just, Ms. Young, go do
Ms.
what
Young, go
we
handle
want,
it.
go do what you do so well.
Mr. Chairman, how about if administration just looks at the procurement policy that we have in place for those options? And we'll follow the procurement policy that we have in place. If there's any issues with that, we'll come back to the board and get clarification and further direction.
The reason I want a motion is because we were gonna go out for bid, and now we're not. We're gonna move in a little different
I
direction.
move that we follow current procurement
There you
policy
go.
on this project.
Because that was a board-approved policy, so we can do that.
There we go. Proper motion by Commissioner Turner, proper second by Commissioner Pickens. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Thank you. All right. And, Mr. Pickens, you're done?
I'm
With your
done.
Comments? And I have no comments. County Attorney? He's not here. County Administrator?
Can I speak for the county
You
attorney?
can wave in support.
Wave in support for the county attorney
Okay, thank
and
you.
for me.
And for the County Administrator? And for the County Administrator. Great, thank you. Any public comment from the public on miscellaneous? Hearing none, we're going to adjourn the meeting.